front of them, took what he had been lying on, and went home praising God. Everyone was amazed and gave praise to God. They were filled with awe and said, "We have seen remarkable things today." After this, Jesus went out and saw a tax collector by the name of Levi sitting at his tax booth. "Follow me," Jesus said to him. And Levi got up, left everything, and followed him. Then Levi held a great banquet for Jesus at his house, and a large crowd of tax collectors and others were eating with them. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law who belonged to their sect complained to his disciples, "Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" Jesus answered them, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." They said to him, "John's disciples often fast and pray, and so do the disciples of the Pharisees, but yours go on eating and drinking." Jesus answered, "Can you make the friends of the bridegroom fast while he is with them? But the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them. In those days they will fast." He told them this parable: "No one tears a piece out of a new garment to patch an old one. Otherwise, they will have torn the new garment, and the patch from the new will not match the old. And no one pours new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the new wine will burst the skins. The wine will run out, and the wineskins will be ruined."
Continue with the Gospel of Luke the next 2 weeks, and we'll do. This is unedited from the New International Version, but because we want to end at the end of this quarter, we're going to edit it somewhat ourselves, and so the next 2 weeks will be from the end of the Gospel of Luke, more about Jesus' crucifixion and death. So I think you'll find that very interesting. Well, we'll be continuing with our series in just a minute on the end times. Our offering is the North American Division, and we'll have a short video.
Being a Christian in a closed country is not easy. Sharing your faith in God can have terrible consequences. You don't see the true value of Christianity until your faith is tried in a place like this. When everyone is different, you must hold strong to your beliefs. I moved from my home country because of a scholarship I received. When I arrived in this new nation, I searched for a Christian church family for support, but there was none. Then some friends invited me to meet on Sabbath at an address they would provide. I agreed, and we met at a house that they rented for religious meetings and worship. There, I felt welcomed and at peace. My heart was content, and everyone was really nice. I started learning a lot of new lessons from the Bible. The Sabbath was a new topic for me, and I saw how important and enduring God's law really is. After studying the Bible, I decided to get baptized. It was a good step toward God. Now, I participate in many activities of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. But as I share my faith with others, I find it challenging because we do not have a regular place of worship. We often change meeting locations, moving from house to house for various reasons. We long to have our own permanent place where we can worship. Please pray that we find one soon. And also pray that the government may recognize our church meetings in this country.
So there are many places where we can't really, Christians can't worship freely. And we have that wonderful privilege. I just wanted to remind you of the importance of spending a little time in the morning or later in the day, whenever it's convenient, because as that slide pointed out, I like it says, begin each day with God and increase your energy to follow his call, because spending time with God is the source of energy or power as a Christian. Coming to church just is not enough. It's one day. We need a connection with God every single day. And if we try and manage with just that pitiful, it would be like eating one meal one time a week. It might be enough to keep you from starving to death, I don't know. But you would be very sickly, very puny. And as a Christian, it's equal or more of a problem with this thing that many of us do in terms of just eating spiritually once a week. So we'll continue with our series on the end time. Before we do, though, I just wanted, I noticed while we were looking at the video, what did Jesus spend a large percentage of his time doing during his ministry? Healing. Now, he spent a lot of time in personal ministry as well, one-on-one, and then the very least amount of time, at least according to what we see in the Gospels, was spent in big crowds. You know, he was up front preaching to them. And I think those are Jesus' whole reason for being on this earth was to teach us what God is like. And God, that's the way God is. Number one, he is the creator, and he can not only create us in the beginning, he can fix us when things go wrong. And he will eventually recreate us into the original immortal bodies that he has intended for us all along. And then he spent time working personally with individuals. And the last, I agree it's more efficient perhaps to talk to large crowds at once, but it's less effective. And Jesus knew this, and it was reflected in his ministry. Well, our series on the end time, preparation for the end time, every time I look at the quarterly for this week, I see this man who's standing in front of a very gloomy, stormy sky. He has his Bible in his hand, which is a very good thing. He looks somewhat, what would we say, uncertain, perplexed maybe. Now it may just be he's very thoughtful, and I think that's probably the best interpretation we could put on this picture, is that he's thinking very carefully about what's coming, but it's not a good picture, is it? And really, the whole subject of end times points to one thing and one thing only, and what is that? It is the best news ever. The coming of Christ. So preparation for the end time is preparing to meet Christ face to face. And it is a solemn time. There's going to be a lot of problems, and as we'll see today in our lesson, a lot of trouble for God's people. But it will be, the end result is worth it. And why is there trouble right before Jesus comes? Satan is involved, and he is not giving up without a fight. And God's people will be caught in the crossfire, so to speak. And we may be, some of us may be casualties of the end times, but the end result will be the coming of Jesus, our Creator. So it will all be good. Our lesson today is entitled America and Babylon. And I just have to say that as I can't even count how many evangelistic meetings I've attended in my life. As a child, they were very frequent. As an adult, very frequent, although less frequent, it seems, than when I was a child. But every single one, this topic comes up of America and Bible prophecy. And I think that there is a little problem with this topic. First of all, there's no positive identification of the second beast, and we'll get to this in a minute in Revelation 13, as the United States. And in one of your the last part of your handout last week, the Bruce Cameron study notes for this week, which I hand out a week in advance to help you in studying, he points out that at the same time that the papacy was taken captive, the Pope was taken captive in 1798, not only did the United States arise in a relatively unpopulated area, there were many other countries, such as Australia, and even Russia is a very unpopulated country. So what's to say that this lamb-like beast, and we'll be looking at this in more detail in the next few minutes, refers to the United States or just to the United States? So I'm not saying that it doesn't. I'm just saying we can't just assume that something is correct because we've been told it's correct. Is that a valid thing to say? The only safe defense when we're studying about God is what? God's Word. Because it is inspired by God, and it is the safest, it is the best representation we have today of what God thinks and what God is like, and it's where our safety lies, isn't it? All right, let's go ahead and get started. There are a lot of texts, and some of them we won't read. We'll just summarize. They're all in your handout. If anyone doesn't have a handout, raise your hand. We've got plenty. Oh, 2 left. So let's get started. First, I wanted to just refer to Daniel 12. And this is the end of the book of Daniel is a very complicated and murky and hard to figure out section of the book of Daniel. Daniel 2 is simple. Daniel 2, the vision that Nebuchadnezzar had of the golden image, or the multi-metal image, was actually explained in Daniel 2. So it's not a problem at all, but Daniel 12 is a little more of a problem, but Daniel 12:1 is not. There's no question what this is talking about. It says, "At that time Michael shall stand up, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people, and there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that time. And this is the clue as to when this happens. It says, and at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone who is found written in the book. And what is the book? The book of life. So he's talking about more than just the Jews that are captive in Babylon, isn't he? And Michael, as we read through the Old Testament, is a term that is frequently used and appears to, and Ellen White confirms this, appears to refer to Jesus himself, even before he came to this earth as a human being. Jesus has always been in existence, and his one purpose as a member of the Godhead has been to reach out to the creation. So even before Jesus came as a human being, he was frequently involved in humans' activities, and it refers to him as the one who will deliver God's people, everyone whose name is found written in the book. And at that time, just before that time, is when this time of trouble happens. And that makes sense. We just mentioned earlier that the devil is not happy that Christ is returning, and the whole great controversy is about to be wrapped up, and he's giving it his best last shot. As believers in Jesus, we can be caught in the crossfire. Now, just to refresh our memories, this Revelation 12 has a vision of a woman clothed with the sun who's pregnant, about to give birth. She is miraculously protected and saved. And who does this woman represent? It represents God's church. And as you read through these verses, it becomes more clear. You could say, well, this represents Mary. But, well, that doesn't even fit in the first verse, because it says she is in the heavens, she's clothed with the sun, the moon are under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars are on her head. It does say she was pregnant and was going to give birth to a man-child. That would fit with Mary, but nothing else fits with Mary. And it's clearly a symbol of God's people, of the church, the followers of Jesus, who was the man-child. But at the same time, this other symbol appears, this enormous red dragon. It's a little hard to see in that picture from this distance. And he has 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on its heads. And we get an idea right away who this dragon is. It says that his tail swept 1/3 of the stars out of the sky. This implies the activity of Satan, resulting in 1/3 of the angels of heaven rebelling and being cast out of heaven. And when the child was born, eventually the child was caught up to God and to his throne, and the woman flees into the wilderness, where she might be taken care of for 1,260 days. And if you count out a day for a year, 1,260 years, you come down to the time that we talked about earlier, 1798. All this time period, basically, between the sending of the gospel to the Gentiles and the French Revolution, when the Pope was taken captive, the church existed, but it was in a very sad state as far as the official church in the Middle Ages. And really there was only one church as such. And many nations, that church was you were forced to be, it was part of your national heritage. In many countries that's still the case. It's not that you join a church, it's that you're born into a church by nature of where you live and who your parents were. So this I think is a very good description of the church during the time that the church was in hiding during the Dark Ages. And then if you skip down a few verses, in verse 12, it says, "Therefore rejoice, you heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has gone down to you. He is filled with fury because he knows that his time is short." And elsewhere in chapter 12, it identifies the dragon as the devil. So the devil has his focus on God's church during the end times. And verse 17 is even more specific. "The dragon was enraged at the woman and went off to wage war against the rest of her offspring." And here's the identification: those who keep God's commands and hold fast their testimony about Jesus. So two things that identify God's people in the last days are being willing to follow what God says, that's following God's commands, and holding fast to the gospel, which is the testimony about Jesus. And there are other texts you can put with this to expand the idea of the testimony of Jesus to include the spirit of prophecy. But the whole revelation of God is what we're really talking about here, isn't it? It includes not just the books of the spirit of prophecy, but includes the Bible, it includes the story of the life of Jesus, and all that we can learn from that about God. The testimony about Jesus is really the testimony about God, isn't it? That God is the one who is right in the great controversy, and the devil is the one who is wrong. So then, in Revelation 13, we see the dragon standing on the shore of the sea. And the sea in Bible prophecy represents what? People, a lot of people, nations, populated areas. And he sees a beast coming up out of the sea from these populated areas. It has 10 horns, 7 heads with 10 crowns, and on each head a blasphemous name. Really, very similar description to the dragon itself, isn't it? That we read back in Revelation 12. But it is a leopard-like beast. It has some characteristics of a leopard. And leopards have always been associated with royalty. And the horns have crowns, which further sort of nails down this idea that this beast represents a group of kingdoms who have a single purpose. And when we go back into the book of Daniel, and this is all in your quarterly, I didn't put all of those texts from Daniel in our handout, but Daniel 7 particularly, this same general idea is presented, and there is one of these horns assumes great prominence. It's called the little horn. And it uproots 3 of the other kings. Initially in Daniel there was 10 horns, and it uprooted 3 of them. What does that leave you with? It leaves you with 7. So there's some correspondence here. But this little horn in Daniel speaks great things against the Most High and thinks to change times and laws, thinks to change God's law, particularly the only law, the only commandment that has anything to do with time, the fourth commandment. And we see this when we look at history. Down through the centuries, Constantine, the emperor, brought in the worship of Sunday, the day of the sun, a pagan day of rest. And the Christian church took it over. And eventually, I think it was the Council of Nicaea, it was set up that Christians could both keep Sunday and Saturday, at least keep Saturday as a fast day. Now, that's interesting, isn't it? Because a day that's fasting for a lot of people would not be a really great day, would it? And already there's effort to put God's Sabbath in a negative light and to make this pagan day of worship assume preeminence. And as time went by, more and more, the first day of the week, which does coincidentally happen to be the day that Jesus was resurrected, became associated with the resurrection. So this is a man-made system of worship that substitutes a man-made seal or symbol of your following this religion for the symbol that God gives us. He says, I give you my Sabbath as a sign between you and me that I'm the one who saves you. And of course, Exodus 20 says, 8, is it verse 8? Says that the Sabbath was made as a memorial even further back, not only of saving us, but of creation. So it's an indication of God's wonderful creative power, isn't it? So just moving on, this is the leopard-like beast. It has some characteristics of a bear and a mouth of a lion, and it gets its power from whom? From the dragon. Now, this is interesting because in Daniel, where the beasts are lined out, the dragon beast was Rome, and the church eventually was the successor of Rome, wasn't it? The church in Rome kind of came to be synonyms. And so the great authority, his throne, came from the dragon. One of the heads had a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. And this is when at the end of the 1260 years, the Pope was taken captive, and the Catholic Church seemed to be very much diminished in its influence. And it was very much diminished in its influence. And in many countries, the New World, and a lot of those countries that I mentioned, including the United States, the Catholic Church had a very much decreased profile. So we could even say that in the United States, Christianity was basically, in the early days, Protestantism. With the Puritans, immigrants from Europe who came to the United States. So Christianity took a little different form in the United States. The whole world was filled with wonder and followed the beast. People worshiped the dragon. And I have emphasized in these slides, almost every screen, the word worship is involved. And this is what the whole great controversy is about. It's about worshiping the right God or the wrong God, depending on your viewpoint. People worship the dragon because he had given authority to the beast. So when people worshiped this false system of worship, John says they're really worshiping whom? Who's the dragon? Satan. Who is like the beast? Who can wage war against it? The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies. And blasphemies means to say basically that I'm God. And that is something that the Church of the Middle Ages, it's not stated as such anymore, but the Church of the Middle Ages proudly said that they were God's representative. The Pope was God's representative on earth. And either they take the place of God or they take the place of Christ. Take your pick. And it exercised its authority for 42 months, and if you calculate that out, that's 1,260 years, which again coincides to what the number that was in Revelation 12. And of course, the 1,260 years or 1,260 days is also in the book of Daniel. John, of course, knew about Daniel. And the visions that Daniel had were I think we could say, were the basis or the foundation for John expanding, opening up what was in the book of Daniel. So it blasphemed God, it slandered his name. It was given power to wage war against God's holy people and to conquer them, and it was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. All inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the Lamb's book of life, the Lamb who was slain from the creation of the world. And remember, we read in Revelation 12, the ones who would be saved were the ones whose name was written in the book of life. And in Revelation 13, it says the ones who worship the beast, their names are not written in the Lamb's book of life. Then the second beast in Revelation 13:11, so it's the second beast, but it's really the third, counting the dragon, which was before the two beasts. Then he says, I saw a second beast coming out of the earth. It had two horns like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. And this is where Adventists have traditionally identified the United States as the second lamb-like beast. There are some things that fit. It comes, instead of coming out of the sea, which represents people, it came out of what? The earth, which would imply that there's not a lot of people. And it is based on, the United States is based on two principles: freedom of religion and a republic as a form of government. And that could correspond with those two horns. And this artist portrayed the lamb-like beast as a buffalo. He was going to be sure that we got the idea that this is the United States, since the buffalo is kind of a symbol for the United States. But let's think for just a minute, and I fully agree that the United States is, at this time, it's the preeminent country in the world, isn't it? It's the one who is the leader, the quotes, the superpower. And we see signs that maybe our position in that regard is slipping a bit. But it is still the case that the United States has a very big role to play in world affairs, and anything that happens here is likely to happen everywhere else. I just wanted to point out, though, I'm having to back up too far here, that the first beast it's not just the United States that follows the first beast. It's what? What does it say here? The whole world followed the beast, and people worship the dragon. The whole world is what we're really talking about. So in the end times, the second beast has to have more than just the United States as a fulfillment, doesn't it? So what does the first beast represent? We said it represents a counterfeit system of worship, isn't it? It was very close to the real thing, but there were important differences, not only to do with the Sabbath, but with the attitude towards God himself. And so if the first beast is a counterfeit form of worship, I think we could say that the second beast is like it, because it says it exercises all the authority of the first beast and made the earth and its inhabitants, here's the word again, worship the first beast whose fatal wound had been healed. And I think it is extremely important when we look at the news feeds and see the influence of the Pope, particularly this current Pope, who has a very pleasant, I would even say Christian approach to people. But you notice when the Pope came to the United States, something happened that would have been unthinkable a few years ago. He had a speech before both houses of Congress. And I think this is an example of the problems we face as a country with the church beginning to be more active in the functions of the state. On the one hand, we could say it's great for people to follow, quotes, Christian principles in the way our country is run. But there are a lot of people here who are not Christians. And God's first principle of his government is freedom of choice. People are free to choose for God or against him. They can choose to be whatever religion they want to be. And that really, as we said earlier, is one of the two founding principles of this country, isn't it? Freedom of religion and freedom of choice. So when we see that begin to be eroded, that's a concern, but it's also, I think, an indication of beginnings of fulfillment of this prophecy in Revelation 13. By the way, what is prophecy for? Telling us the things to come. Is it so we can say, well, this happened, I saw it on the news today, so the coming of Christ must be near. I better get ready. I mean, that seems like a good function for prophecy. But Jesus said that he told his disciples what was going to happen before the second coming.